My daughter called me at 2 a.m. Her voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of terror. "Dad, please come get me." When I arrived at her in-law's estate, the mother-in-law blocked the door and sneered, "She is not leaving." I did not argue. I did not knock. I drove my Ford F-150 straight through their wrought iron gates. They called the police on me. They laughed as I was handcuffed. They thought they were dealing with a retired truck driver who had stepped out of line. They had no idea they had just declared war on the man who was about to buy the bank that owned their mortgage. My name is Quincy Harper. I am 68 years old, and for the last 5 years I have let the world believe I am just a simple pensioner. I spent 40 years building a logistics empire that moved freight across every highway in America, but I sold it all to live a quiet life near my daughter Jasmine. I thought I was done with fights. I thought I had hung up my gloves. But when the Sterling family decided to treat my daughter like property, they woke up a beast that had been sleeping very lightly. Before I tell you how I dismantled their life piece by piece, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn a bridge to save the person you love. The call came at 2:05 a.m. The silence of my small house was shattered by the ringtone I had set specifically for Jasmine. It was a cheerful melody, a stark contrast to the sound of her breathing on the other end. It was ragged, shallow breathing, the kind that comes after crying for hours. Then came the words that stopped my heart. "Dad, he is hurting me. They locked me in. Please." The line went dead before I could ask a single question. I did not call back. I knew that if I called back, someone else might answer, and that would waste precious seconds. I did not put on shoes. I stepped into my boots. I did not look for a jacket. I grabbed the keys to my truck from the hook by the door. My movements were mechanical, precise, born of a lifetime of handling crises on the road. I walked to the lockbox in my closet, punched in the code, and took out my legally registered 9mm handgun. I checked the chamber. Loaded. I did not plan to use it, but I would not walk into a den of wolves without teeth. I slid it into the glove compartment of my truck and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep growl that matched the boiling in my blood. The drive to the Sterling estate usually took 20 minutes. I made it in 9. The streets were empty, slick with a light rain that made the asphalt shine under the streetlights. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of ash. My mind was not on the road. It was replaying that phone call. The fear in her voice. Jasmine was a strong woman. I raised her to be tough, for her to beg for her to sound that broken something terrible had happened. The Sterling estate loomed ahead. It was a sprawling colonial mansion set back from the road, surrounded by a high brick wall and an imposing wrought iron gate. It was a fortress of old money and arrogance. I saw the keypad on the driver's side, the intercom where guests were expected to beg for entry. I did not slow down. I shifted gears and floored the accelerator. The heavy steel bumper of my truck slammed into the center of the gates. Metal screeched against metal, a horrific tearing sound that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. The lock snapped. The gate swung open, bent and defeated. I drove up the winding driveway and skidded to a halt inches from their front steps. The front door flew open before I could even cut the engine. Victoria Sterling stood there. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first car, her face a mask of indignation. She did not look afraid. She looked offended. To her, I was not a father coming for his child. I was the help, acting out of turn. I stepped out of the truck, the rain instantly soaking my shirt. "Get off my property, Quincy," she spat, her voice shrill. "You are trespassing. Jasmine is asleep. She does not want to see you." I walked up the steps. I am a big man. Years of loading cargo have left me with shoulders that fill a doorway and hands that resemble shovels. I towered over her. "Move, Victoria." She did not move. She crossed her arms, blocking the threshold. "You people always have to make a scene, don't you? Go home to your side of town." I did not have time for her racism. I did not have time for her games. I reached out and swept her aside as easily as if she were a curtain. She stumbled back, gasping, hitting her shoulder against the doorframe. I stepped into the foyer. It smelled of lavender and expensive polish. "Jasmine," I bellowed. My voice shook the crystal chandelier above my head. Blake appeared from the hallway leading to the kitchen. My son-in-law, the man who had promised to cherish my daughter. He was wearing pajama bottoms and holding a golf club. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with a mix of adrenaline and liquor. Get out! Blake screamed, raising the club. I am calling the cops! He swung the club. It was a clumsy, pathetic swing. I caught the shaft in my left hand before it could come anywhere near me. I wrenched it from his grip and tossed it across the marble floor. The clatter was deafening. I grabbed him by the collar of his t-shirt and slammed him against the wall. The drywall cracked behind him. Where is she? I asked. My voice was low, dangerous. He tried to sneer, but his lip was trembling. She is learning a lesson. She needs to learn her place. I tightened my grip, cutting off his air. I will ask you one more time before I break every bone in this hand. Where is my daughter? The study, he choked out, pointing a shaking finger down the hall. I dropped him. He slid to the floor, coughing. I ran down the hallway. The door to the study was locked from the outside. I kicked it. The wood splintered near the handle. I kicked it again, putting my entire weight behind the blow. The door flew open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the heavy drapes. I fumbled for the light switch. When the light flooded the room, I felt my knees almost give out. Jasmine was not sitting on a chair. She was on the floor, curled into a fetal position in the corner. Her wrists were bound with a silk tie. Her face. My beautiful girl's face was swollen. Her left eye shut, a dark purple bruise blossoming across her cheekbone. Her lip was split. She flinched when the light came on. She raised her hands to protect her head. Don't hit me, Blake. I'll sign it. I promise I'll sign it. The sound that came out of my throat was not human. It was a sob of pure rage. I fell to my knees beside her. It's me, baby. It's Dad. I'm here. She opened her good eye. Dad, she whispered. She collapsed into my arms, her body shaking so violently her teeth chattered. I untied her wrists. My fingers were clumsy with fury. I saw the red marks where the silk had dug into her skin. I lifted her up. She was light, too light. Had she been eating? Had they been starving her too? I carried her out of that room. I carried her down the hallway like she was a child again. Blake was still on the floor in the foyer, rubbing his neck. Victoria was on the phone, screaming at the operator. He is here. He is attacking us. He has a gun. Send everyone. She looked at me, holding her battered daughter in my arms, and she did not show an ounce of shame. She looked at Jasmine's bruised face and rolled her eyes. Put her down, Quincy, Victoria commanded. She is my son's wife. She belongs in this house. She belongs to no one but herself, I growled. I walked past them, stepping over the golf club. I made it to the porch just as the world turned into a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights. 3 police cruisers screeched up the driveway, blocking my truck. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. They saw a large black man carrying a woman out of a wealthy white family's home. They did not see a rescuer. They saw a perpetrator. Put her down. Get on the ground. Hands behind your head. The commands overlapped, aggressive and loud. The beams of their flashlights blinded me. Officers, please, Jasmine cried out, her voice weak. He is my father. He is helping me. They did not listen. One officer rushed up the stairs and grabbed Jasmine from my arms, pulling her away roughly. Another kicked the back of my knee. I went down. I hit the wet concrete hard. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap around my wrists. They pressed my face into the rough stone of the porch. You have the right to remain silent. I turned my head to the side. I could see Victoria standing in the doorway, dry and safe. Blake stood behind her, smirking, rubbing his neck. Victoria looked down at me, pinned to the ground like an animal. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. I told you, Quincy, she said, her voice dripping with venom. You do not belong here. You are nothing, just a violent man who raised a hysterical daughter. You are going to die in prison. The officer yanked me up. I did not fight. I did not scream. I looked Victoria dead in the eye. I etched that smirk into my memory. I wanted to remember exactly how confident she looked in this moment. I wanted to remember the triumph in her eyes, because I knew something she did not. I knew that while I was sitting in that cell, my lawyer Sarah was already awake. I knew that the Phoenix Holdings Group, a company I secretly owned, had just triggered the purchase of the distressed debt on this entire estate. They thought they had won because they had the police on their side. They did not realize that I had the one thing that spoke louder than the law in this country. I had their debt. I got into the back of the police car. The door slammed shut, sealing me in. I watched through the wire mesh as the paramedics tended to Jasmine. She was crying, reaching out for me. I pressed my hand against the glass. Hold on, baby girl, I whispered to the empty air. Daddy has a plan, and it starts with taking everything they have, every single dime. The holding cell smelled of stale coffee and unwashed bodies. It was a smell I had not encountered in 40 years, not since I was a young man making foolish mistakes in a world that did not want me to succeed. I sat on the metal bench, the cold steel seeping through my trousers and chilling my bones. My wrists ached where the handcuffs had been too tight. They had taken my belt, my shoelaces, and my dignity, but they could not take my rage. It burned in my gut, hot and steady, keeping me focused while I stared at the peeling paint on the opposite wall. The door to the cell block buzzed open. Chief Miller walked in. He was a man of average height, but he carried himself with the swagger of a king in his own small castle. He held a styrofoam cup of coffee in one hand and my file in the other. He stopped in front of the bars, looking me up and down with a mixture of amusement and disgust. To him, I was just another statistic. Just another angry black man who could not control his temper. He did not see the man who had built a logistics empire from a single-use delivery van. He saw a stereotype. "You know, Quincy people like you really try my patience," Miller said, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "We try to keep this town quiet. We try to keep it respectable. And then you go and drive your truck through the gates of one of our finest families. What were you thinking, boy?" He called me boy. I am 68 years old. I have grandchildren. I have employed thousands of people. I have paid more in taxes than this man will earn in 10 lifetimes. But in this cage in this town, I was just a boy to him. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, but I kept my back straight. I looked him directly in the eyes. "I was thinking about my daughter," I said calmly. My voice was steady. I was thinking about the bruises on her face. I was thinking about how she was tied up in a dark room. "Did you ask the Sterlings about that, Chief? Did you ask them why my daughter was bound like an animal?" Miller laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He shook his head as if he were talking to a slow child. "Domestic disputes are complicated, Quincy. Mrs. Sterling told us Jasmine was having an episode. She was hurting herself. They restrained her for her own safety until the doctor could arrive. You should be thanking them. Instead, you broke down their door and assaulted Mr. Sterling. That is a felony. You are looking at 5 to 10 years. You are going to die in a cage, old man." He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were already gone. He did not see my hands curl into fists. He did not see the calculation in my eyes. He thought he held all the cards because he had the badge and the keys. He did not realize that the game we were playing was not about laws. It was about power, and he was about to learn that real power does not wear a uniform. I sat back down. I closed my eyes and breathed. I waited. I knew Sarah was coming. I knew she would be here soon. And when she arrived, the atmosphere in this station would change. It took another hour before the heavy steel door buzzed again. This time, the footsteps were different. They were sharp, purposeful clicks of high heels on the linoleum floor. I opened my eyes. Sarah Jenkins stood on the other side of the bars. She was a vision of corporate warfare in a tailored navy suit, holding a briefcase that cost more than Chief Miller's car. She looked out of place in this dingy station like a diamond sitting in a gutter. The officer escorting her looked confused and nervous. He had probably never seen a lawyer of her caliber in this precinct before. Sarah did not look at the officer. Her eyes locked onto mine. She did not see a criminal. She saw her boss. She saw the man who had mentored her and made her the sharpest legal mind in the state. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I apologize for the delay. The chief tried to stall me. He claimed he could not find your paperwork." I stood up and walked to the bars. "It does not matter, Sarah. Just get me out of here. How is Jasmine?" Sarah's expression softened just for a fraction of a second. That was the only crack in her armor. She stepped closer to the bars, lowering her voice so the guard could not hear. "She is at the county hospital. I have a private security detail posted outside her room. The Sterlings tried to move her to a private facility, but I blocked it with a medical injunction. She is safe, Quincy. She is awake. She told me everything." Relief washed over me like cool water. She was safe. That was all that mattered. The anger in my chest cooled slightly, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Good," I said. "Now get me out." The guard stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now hold on a minute, lady. You can't just walk in here and demand his release. The chief said no bail. This man is a threat to the community." Sarah turned to the guard. She did not raise her voice. She did not get angry. She simply pulled a document from her briefcase and held it up. It was signed by a judge who sat 2 counties over a judge who owed me a favor from 10 years ago. "This is a writ of habeas corpus," Sarah said, "and this is a bail order signed by Judge Reynolds. Unless you want to explain to the state Supreme Court why you are unlawfully detaining my client, I suggest you open this door. Right now." The guard blinked. He looked at the paper, then at Sarah, then at me. He saw the confidence. He saw the authority. The power dynamic in the room shifted. He realized suddenly that the old man in the cell might be more than he appeared. He fumbled for his keys. The lock clicked. The door swung open. I stepped out. I did not look back at the cell. I adjusted my shirt. I looked at Sarah. "What about the charges?" I asked. "Assault with a deadly weapon, trespassing, malicious destruction of property." Sarah recited the list as we walked down the hallway. "It is a long list, Quincy. The district attorney is a golf buddy of Blake Sterling. They are going to come at you hard." I stopped in the middle of the hallway. Officers were staring at us. "Let them come," I said. "I do not care about the charges. I do not care if I have to spend every dime I have on legal fees. I want to know about their finances." Sarah nodded. She knew this was coming. "I have the preliminary report. The Sterling family is cash poor. They are leveraging everything to keep up appearances. They have a massive loan coming due next week. $10 million. We walked out into the lobby. Chief Miller was coming out of his office. He stopped when he saw me free. His face turned a deep shade of red. "You think a fancy lawyer makes you untouchable?" Harper Miller shouted across the room. "I will have you back in here by tonight. And here is a parting gift." He shoved a piece of paper into my chest. It was a restraining order. "You stay away from the Sterling estate," Miller sneered. "You stay away from Blake and Victoria. You stay away from your daughter. If you come within 500 feet of them, I will arrest you, and next time, I won't be so gentle." I took the paper. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. I did not say a word to him. I just walked out the front door into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. My truck was impounded, so Sarah led me to her black sedan. I sat in the passenger seat and took a deep breath. The silence of the car was a blessing after the noise of the jail. I looked out the window. We were driving past the turnoff that led to the Sterling estate. I could see the lights of their mansion on the hill in the distance. It looked like a castle glowing with golden light while the rest of the town slept in darkness. They were probably up there right now drinking their scotch, celebrating their victory. They thought they had won. They thought the restraining order was a shield. They thought the law was a wall that would protect them from the consequences of their actions. They did not understand that I was done playing by their rules. I looked at that house and I did not feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, terrifying clarity. I was going to destroy them, not with violence, not with fists. I was going to take the one thing that made them feel superior. I was going to take their world. I turned to Sarah. She was driving with both hands on the wheel, her eyes on the road. "Who holds the note on their loan?" I asked. Sarah glanced at me. "First National Bank of Fairfield. It is a local bank. The Sterlings have banked there for 3 generations. The bank president is Victoria's cousin. They will likely give them an extension." I nodded. "A local bank. A family bank. Small enough to be vulnerable. How much liquidity do we have in the Phoenix Holdings account?" I asked. Sarah did not blink. She knew the numbers better than I did. "We have about 80 million in liquid assets available for immediate deployment." "Why?" I looked back at the glowing mansion on the hill. I pictured Victoria's smirk. I pictured Blake's arrogance. I pictured the fear in my daughter's eyes. "Call the board of First National Bank first thing in the morning," I said. My voice was soft, but it filled the car. "What are we doing, Quincy?" Sarah asked, though I think she already knew the answer. "I want to make an acquisition," I said. "You want to buy the loan?" Sarah asked. "No," I said. I leaned back in the seat and watched the Sterling estate disappear in the rearview mirror. I do not want just the loan. I want the leverage. I want to own the ground they walk on. I want to own the roof over their heads. I want to own the hand that feeds them. I turned to Sarah and gave the order that would start the war. "Buy the bank, Sarah. Buy the whole damn bank." The parking lot of St. Jude's Hospital was bathed in the harsh white glare of security lights. It was 3 in the morning and the world was asleep, but inside these walls time did not exist. I sat in Sarah's sedan for a moment watching the main entrance. 2 men in dark suits stood by the sliding glass doors. They were not hospital security. They were private muscle. The Sterlings had moved fast. They had hired guards to keep me out to keep the narrative under their control. They wanted to make sure that when Jasmine woke up, the first face she saw was one of them, not me. They wanted to coach her on what to say to the police. I did not get out of the car immediately. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a baseball cap, pulling it low over my eyes. I knew the front door was a fortress, but I also knew this building better than the architect who designed it. 20 years ago, when I was expanding my logistics company, I handled the transport for every piece of steel and concrete that built the north wing of this hospital. I knew about the service elevator near the loading dock that required a key card only the senior janitorial staff and the chief of surgery possessed. I also knew that Marcus Evans, the chief of surgery, was a man who never forgot a favor. I had paid for his son's rehab quietly and without asking for a thank you when the boy got hooked on painkillers. I slipped out of the car and moved through the shadows skirting the perimeter of the building. The air smelled of rain and rubbing alcohol. I found the loading dock door propped open with a brick just like the night shift always did to sneak smoke breaks. I walked in. I blended in. I walked with the purpose of a man who belonged there. I took the service elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. I found Marcus standing at the nurse's station reviewing charts. He looked up, saw me, and his eyes widened slightly. He did not say a word. He just nodded and handed me a key card, sliding it across the counter. "Room 412, he whispered. "There is a guard sitting outside, but he is asleep. Be quick, Quincy." I took the card. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked down the corridor, counting the numbers. 408, 410, 412. The guard was there, a young man in a cheap suit, his head lolling on his chest, snoring softly. I swiped the card. The light turned green. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it silently behind me. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the vitals monitor. Jasmine lay in the bed. She looked so small. The blanket was pulled up to her chin, but it could not hide the swelling on her face. Her left eye was purple and swollen shut. Her lip was stitched. Tubes ran from her arm. I approached the bed, feeling a physical pain in my chest, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. This was my little girl, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, the girl I had read stories to, the girl I had promised to protect from everything. I reached out and gently touched her hand. It was cold. Her eyes fluttered open. The good eye, the right one, was filled with panic. She tried to pull away, gasping a sound of pure terror. "No, no, please, Blake, I will sign it," she whimpered. "It is me, baby," I whispered, keeping my voice low and soothing. "It is Daddy. I am here. You are safe." She blinked, focusing on my face. The panic slowly receded, replaced by a flood of tears. She tried to sit up, but winced in pain. "Dad," she sobbed, "you came. They said you were in jail. They said you would never get in here." "I am here," I said, squeezing her hand. "Tell me what happened, Jasmine. I need to know everything. Why did he do this?" She took a shaky breath. She looked at the door, terrified that someone would burst in. "It is the trust fund," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom's trust fund. The one that unlocks when I turn 30 or when I have a child." I nodded. My late wife had set up a substantial trust for Jasmine, protected by layers of legal iron so that no husband could touch it. "Blake is in trouble, Dad," she continued. "The company is drowning. He owes money to bad people. He brought home a document yesterday. A waiver. He wanted me to sign over the rights to the trust as collateral for a loan." "And you refused," I said. It was not a question. I told him no. She said, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. I told him that money was for our future, for the baby. I froze. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. The baby. "You are pregnant?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She nodded, placing a hand on her stomach. 2 months. I told him I was pregnant, thinking it would stop him, thinking he would be happy, but he just got angry. He said the baby was just another expense. He said if I did not sign the waiver, he would make sure there was no baby to worry about. A red haze filled my vision. I had to grip the bed rail to keep from breaking it. He had threatened his own unborn child. He had beaten the mother of his child because he needed money to cover his own failures. This was not just domestic violence. This was a calculated act of evil. He grabbed my arm, she said, recounting the nightmare. He threw me against the desk. I hit my head. He kept screaming that you were just a stupid truck driver and that you had raised a stupid, stubborn daughter. He said he owned me. He said once I signed the papers, he would send me away to a facility so I would not embarrass him anymore. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Dad, he is going to come back. He said he would bring the papers here. He said I have to sign them before the loan is due on Friday. I leaned forward and kissed her forehead, avoiding the bandages. My lips brushed against her skin, and I made a silent vow to God and to her mother. He is never coming near you again, I said. Listen to me, Jasmine. You are going to stay here. Dr. Evans is going to move you to a different wing in 10 minutes. Sarah has already filed the paperwork. You are safe. But the money, she whispered. He needs $5 million by Friday. He is desperate, Dad. Desperate men do terrible things. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a cold, mechanical precision. Let him be desperate, I said. Let him be terrified. You just rest. Focus on the baby. I will handle the rest. I handled the rest was a phrase Jasmine had heard all her life. When she fell off her bike, I handled it. When she had trouble with math, I handled it. But she had no idea what it meant this time. She did not know that handling it meant destroying the world her husband lived in. I walked out of the room. The guard was still asleep. I did not wake him. I wanted him to explain to Victoria Sterling why he had failed. I took the elevator down to the lobby, avoiding the main entrance again. I walked out through the ambulance bay, stepping into the cool gray light of dawn. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks were rumbling on the streets. People were going to work, oblivious to the war that had just been declared. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my secure phone. I dialed a number that I had not called in 3 years. It was a direct line to a private office in Manhattan, an office that managed my family office, the true source of my wealth. The voice on the other end answered on the first ring. Good morning, Mr. Harper. I walked toward the street, my boots crunching on the gravel. I looked back at the hospital window where my daughter lay broken and bruised. Initialize the Phoenix Protocol, I said. There was a pause on the other end. A pause of recognition. The Phoenix Protocol was a strategy we had designed years ago for a hostile takeover scenario. It involved the simultaneous acquisition of a target's debt, their suppliers, and their legal liabilities. It was a scorched earth tactic. It was designed not just to defeat a competitor, but to erase them, Target the Voice asked. Sterling Construction and all personal assets of Blake and Victoria Sterling, I said. Buy their mortgage, buy their business loans, buy the notes on their cars. If they owe money to the milkman, I want to own the milkman. Understood, sir, the voice said. We will begin purchasing immediately. The markets open in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment watching the sun rise over the city. It was going to be a beautiful day. The sky was turning a soft pink, the color of the nursery I would build for my grandchild. Blake Sterling needed $5 million by Friday. He thought that was his biggest problem. He was wrong. His biggest problem was that he had woken up a man who could write a check for $5 million and not even notice it was gone. He was about to find out that the old black man he called a truck driver was actually the owner of the road. I put the phone away and hailed a taxi. I had a bank to buy. And after that I had a son-in-law to bury. Not in the ground. That would be too easy. I was going to bury him in paperwork, in debt, and in the absolute public shame of losing everything he thought he was entitled to. I got into the cab. The driver looked in the rearview mirror. Where to Pal First National Bank, I said, and step on it. I have a withdrawal to make. The grand ballroom of the Fairfield Country Club was trying too hard. That was my first thought as I walked past the valet stand and ignored the young man in the red vest who reached for my truck keys. I parked my own vehicle. I parked it right next to a gleaming silver Bentley that I knew belonged to the mayor. The contrast was deliberate. My Ford F-150 was clean and well-maintained, but it was a workhorse sitting in a stable of show ponies. It was a statement. I walked up the marble steps, listening to the muffled sound of a string quartet drifting through the double doors. The event was titled The Gala for Historical Preservation, which was a rich irony, considering the Sterling family had made their fortune bulldozing historical woodlands to build tacky condominiums. I had purchased a ticket 3 hours ago through a shell company. It cost $5,000 a plate. To the Sterlings, that amount was a desperate attempt to keep up appearances. To me, it was pocket change. I walked to the entrance. The hostess, a young woman with a clipboard, looked at me and then looked down at her list. She was confused. I was not wearing a tuxedo. I was not wearing a suit. I wore a pair of clean, dark denim jeans, a pressed white button-down shirt, and my polished work boots. I looked exactly like what I was, a man who had built his life with his hands. I looked like the people these guests hired to mow their lawns and park their cars. "Name the hostess," asked her voice, hesitant. "Quincy Harper," I said. "I believe I have a seat at table 4. She scanned the list. Her eyes widened. She found the name. She could not deny me entry, but she looked like she wanted to call security right then and there. She stepped aside and I walked in. The room was bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. There were ice sculptures of swans dripping onto trays of imported oysters. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I knew for a fact that the caterer had demanded payment up front because the Sterling's credit was no longer good in this town. I walked through the crowd. The conversation died in waves as I passed. Heads turned, whispers started. I was a fly in their bowl of milk, a dark smudge on their pristine white canvas. I walked straight to the bar and ordered a sparkling water. I turned around and leaned against the mahogany counter watching them. I wanted them to see me. I wanted to be the discomfort that ruined their evening. Victoria Sterling spotted me from across the room. She was holding a flute of champagne, laughing at a joke made by a potential investor. Her laugh cut off instantly when she saw me. Her face went rigid. She said something to Blake, who was standing next to her, looking pale and sweaty in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight. They moved toward me. They moved like sharks cutting through the water, but I knew they were just toothless fish swimming in a tank I was about to drain. Victoria reached me first. Her smile was plastered on tight, a rictus of social grace masking pure hatred. "Quincy," she said, her voice pitched loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, but low enough to sound polite. "You must be lost. The service entrance is around the back. We are not hiring drivers tonight." The small crowd around us chuckled nervously. They were relieved. They wanted to believe I was just confused help. It made their world make sense again. "I am not here to drive, Victoria," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and carried across the room. "I am here to eat. I paid $5,000 for a ticket just like everyone else, although I suspect my check will actually clear, unlike some people in this room." The chuckles died instantly. The air in the room grew heavy. Blake stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He looked like a child trying to wear his father's authority. "You are drunk," Quincy Blake hissed. "Get out of here before you embarrass yourself. You do not belong here. Look at you. You look like a gardener." I looked down at my boots, then back up at him. I did not blink. "I built a logistics empire in these boots, Blake. I signed checks that would buy this entire country club in these boots. You are wearing a $3,000 tuxedo, but you are standing in a suit of debt." People were listening now. The string quartet seemed to fade into the background. The wealthy elite of Fairfield thrived on gossip, and I was feeding them a feast. Security, Victoria screeched, abandoning her fake smile. "Get this man out of here. He is harassing us." 2 large men in black suits started moving toward us from the perimeter of the room. I did not move. I kept my eyes locked on Blake. "Tell me, Blake," I said, raising my voice slightly so the investors behind him could hear clearly. "How is the refinancing going for Sterling Construction? I heard a rumor that First National Bank is calling in your loans on Friday. $5 million is a lot of money to find in 3 days, especially when you have already mortgaged your house, your cars, and your mother's jewelry." Blake's face turned the color of ash. He looked like he was going to vomit. The investor standing behind him, a man named Mr. Henderson, who ran a venture capital firm, took a subtle step back. He put his drink down. That small movement was the first domino falling. "Shut up," Blake screamed. "You are lying. You are a crazy old man, am I asked. I took a sip of my water. "Then why did you try to force my daughter to sign away her trust fund yesterday? Why did you beat a pregnant woman if you are so rich and successful, Blake?" A gasp went through the room. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Victoria looked around wildly, realizing she was losing control of the narrative. "He is lying. He is senile." "Get him out!" she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. The security guards reached me. One of them grabbed my arm. I did not resist. I did not fight. I did not need to. The damage was done. I looked at the guard, a man who looked tired and underpaid. "I am walking, son," I said gently. "Do not tear the shirt." I shook his hand off and adjusted my collar. I looked at the room one last time. I looked at the investors, the bankers, the socialites. They were all looking at Blake and Victoria now. They were looking at them with suspicion. They were wondering if their own investments were safe. They were wondering if the rumors were true. I turned to Henderson, the investor who had been laughing with Victoria earlier. "Check their liquidity, Mr. Henderson," I said calmly. "Ask to see the audited financials from last quarter. Do not take a check from them unless you want to frame it as a souvenir of a bankruptcy." I turned and walked toward the exit. The security guards flanked me, but they did not touch me again. Behind me I heard Victoria shouting, trying to salvage the situation, trying to laugh it off as the ramblings of a madman. But I heard something else too. I heard the murmurs. I heard the phones coming out. I heard the sound of money moving away from the Sterling family. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet looked at me with wide eyes. I walked to my truck and climbed in. I watched through the windshield as Mr. Henderson walked out of the club only 2 minutes after me. He was on his phone. He looked angry. He got into his Bentley and drove away. I started my engine. I did not smile. This was not fun. This was work. I had just cut off their supply lines. I had poisoned their water. Now all that was left was to wait for them to starve. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the music and the lights behind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Sarah. "The bank board just accepted our offer," she said. "The paperwork is being drafted. You own the debt, Quincy. You own it all." I drove into the darkness. The gala was still going on, but the party was over. They just did not know it yet. The silence in the executive suite of Sterling Construction was heavy enough to crush a man. For Blake Sterling, that crushing weight was a physical reality. It was Wednesday morning, 2 days before the loan from First National was due, 2 days before his carefully constructed facade of wealth and success would crumble into dust. He sat at his mahogany desk, staring at the phone that had stopped ringing. For the last 24 hours, he had dialed every contact in his Rolodex. He had called hedge fund managers he played golf with. He had called venture capitalists who had once begged for a meeting. He had even called a shady hard money lender in Jersey who charged 40% interest. The answer was always the same, a polite secretary telling him that Mr. So-and-so was in a meeting. Or worse, a direct rejection delivered with a tone of pity. They knew. The rumor I had started at the gala had spread like a virus. Everyone knew Sterling Construction was a sinking ship and the rats were swimming away as fast as they could. Blake loosened his tie. His hands were shaking. He reached for the bottle of scotch in his desk drawer. It was 10 in the morning, but he needed the burn to settle his stomach. He poured a glass and downed it in one gulp. The door to his office flew open. He did not need to look up to know it was Victoria. His mother stormed in, throwing her alligator skin handbag onto the leather sofa. She looked immaculate in a cream-colored suit, but her eyes were wild with panic. "Did you fix it, Blake?" she demanded. "Tell me you found the money. The jeweler just called me. He said my credit card was declined." "Declined?" "Blake. Do you know how humiliating that is?" Blake slammed the empty glass down on the desk. "I am trying." "Mother!" he shouted. His voice cracked. "No one will touch us." Henderson pulled out. "The bank is not returning my calls. We are toxic. Someone poisoned the well." Victoria paced the room like a caged tiger. "It was that old man," she spat. "It was Quincy. He did this." "He is a truck driver," Mother Blake groaned, putting his head in his hands. "He does not have this kind of power. We are just over-leveraged. We spent too much. And now the bill is due." Victoria stopped pacing. She walked over to the desk and slammed her hand down on the polished wood. "Then make Jasmine sign the papers," she hissed. "Go to the hospital. Drag her hand across that page if you have to. That trust fund is our money, Blake. It belongs to this family." "I cannot," Blake whispered. "There are guards. Sarah Jenkins has blocked access. If I go near that hospital, I go to jail. And if I go to jail, the company collapses anyway." The intercom on his desk buzzed. It was his assistant. Her voice was trembling. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "there is an email. It just came through the secure server. It is from a group called Phoenix Holdings. The subject line says, 'Capital Injection Proposal.'" Blake's head snapped up. He scrambled for his mouse, clicking frantically. He opened the email. It was short, professional, and to the point. "We understand Sterling Construction is seeking immediate liquidity. Phoenix Holdings is prepared to offer a bridge loan of $10 million. Funds available within 24 hours pending signature. Blake read it twice, then he read it a third time. He looked at Victoria. Tears of relief welled up in his eyes. "We are saved," he whispered. He did not ask who Phoenix Holdings was. He did not ask why a company he had never heard of was offering him a lifeline when everyone else was letting him drown. He did not care. He was a drowning man and he had just seen a rope. He grabbed the phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the email. "Make the appointment," he told his assistant. "Get them in here. Now." 3 hours later, the conference room of Sterling Construction was prepped for the most important meeting in the company's history. Blake had washed his face, changed his shirt, and practiced his confident CEO smile in the mirror. Victoria sat to his right, playing the role of the shrewd matriarch. Across from them sat a man who introduced himself only as Mr. Stone. Mr. Stone was a shark in a human suit. He was an African-American man in his 40s with a shaved head and a suit that cost more than Blake's car. He did not smile. He did not drink the coffee that had been offered. He simply opened his briefcase and slid a thick stack of documents across the glass table. "Phoenix Holdings moves quickly," Mr. Stone said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and devoid of emotion. "We know your situation, Mr. Sterling. We know about the debt due on Friday. We are willing to cover it. $10 million, wired to your account by close of business today." Blake reached for the contract, his hands trembling with eagerness. "Where do I sign?" he asked. Mr. Stone placed a hand on the document, stopping him. "You should read the terms first," Mr. Sterling Stone said. "This is a high-risk loan. The terms reflect that risk." Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "We understand business, Mr. Stone. Just tell us the interest rate." "The interest rate is 15%, Stone said. "But that is not the relevant clause. I draw your attention to Section 4, Paragraph B, the Cross-Collateralization Agreement." Blake looked at the page. The legal jargon swam before his eyes. He saw words like unconditional guarantee and asset forfeiture, but his brain refused to process the danger. He only saw the $10 million. "It says here you are securing the loan against the company assets," Blake said. "That is standard." "Keep reading," Stone said. "Not just company assets, personal assets. This loan is secured by your personal real estate holdings, your vehicles, your investment portfolios, and the personal assets of any co-signer." "That means you, Mrs. Sterling." Victoria stiffened. "My house?" she asked. "If you default, yes," Stone said. "But we are also including a confession of judgment clause. Do you know what that is?" Blake nodded vaguely. "It means we agree we owe the money." "It means," Stone corrected him coldly, "that if you miss a single payment by even 1 minute, you waive your right to a trial. You waive your right to a defense. We do not have to sue you. We simply file the judgment and the marshal seizes your property the same day. There is no grace period. There is no negotiation." The room went silent. This was not a loan. This was a loaded gun pointed at their heads. A rational businessman would have walked away. A smart man would have realized that no legitimate company operates this way. But Blake was not rational. He was desperate. And Victoria was not smart. She was greedy. They exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between mother and son. They were thinking the same thing. They just needed to survive Friday. Once the debt was paid, they would force Jasmine to sign the trust fund waiver. They would use Jasmine's money to pay back Phoenix Holdings. They thought they were using this lender. They did not realize they were the ones being used. "We accept the terms," Victoria said, raising her chin defiantly. "We are good for the money." "Excellent," Stone said. He flipped to the back of the document. "Sign here. And here. And initial here." Blake took the pen. It was a heavy gold fountain pen that his father had given him. He felt a surge of power as the ink flowed onto the paper. He was fixing it. He was the hero. He signed his name with a flourish. "Blake Sterling, CEO." He passed the document to Victoria. She signed it quickly, aggressively, as if her signature alone could intimidate the paper into submission. "It is done," Blake said, leaning back in his chair. "When do we get the money?" Mr. Stone took the documents back. He checked the signatures carefully, ensuring every I was dotted and every T was crossed. He placed them back in his briefcase and clicked the locks shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "The transfer has already been initiated," Stone said, standing up. "You will have the funds within the hour." Phoenix Holdings looks forward to a long and profitable relationship with you." He did not shake their hands. He simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving Blake and Victoria alone with their victory. They cheered. They actually hugged each other, laughing like maniacs. "I told you," Victoria crowed, pouring herself a glass of water. "I told you we would win. That old truck driver thought he could ruin us. He has no idea who he is dealing with." Blake loosened his tie again, grinning. "We are untouchable, Mother. Now let us go celebrate. I want to buy a bottle of champagne that costs more than Quincy's house." 5 miles away in a darkened office, I sat in front of a bank of monitors. I was not smiling. I was not celebrating. I was watching the live feed from the hidden camera I had planted in the Phoenix Holdings briefcase Mr. Stone carried. I watched them hug. I watched them laugh. I heard Victoria call me a truck driver. I took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. My lawyer Sarah sat next to me. She was looking at the signed digital copy of the contract on her tablet. "They signed it," she said softly. "They actually signed it. They did not even ask for a lawyer to review the acceleration clause." "Greed is a powerful blinder, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm, but inside I felt a cold satisfaction that was better than any joy I had ever known. "They think they just bought their freedom." I continued watching Blake on the screen as he high-fived his mother. "They do not realize they just signed their own death warrants." Sarah tapped the screen. "Clause 14C," she read. "The lender reserves the right to declare a default if the borrower's debt-to-equity ratio shifts by more than 5%, or if there is a material change in the management structure, or basically, if the wind blows the wrong direction." "Exactly," I said. I looked at the screen one last time. Blake was on the phone now, probably calling the bank to brag that he had the money. He looked so happy. He looked so relieved. I reached out and pressed a button on my console, cutting the feed. The screen went black. "Transfer the money." "Sarah," I said, "let them pay off the bank. Let them feel safe for a few days. Let them sleep soundly tonight." Sarah began typing, executing the wire transfer that would seal their fate. "What is the next step, Quincy?" she asked. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there in that concrete jungle, my daughter was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from the wounds that man had inflicted on her. And somewhere out there, that man was popping a cork, celebrating his victory. "The next step is simple," I said. "We wait for the check to clear. We wait for them to pay off First National. And then on Monday morning, Phoenix Holdings is going to conduct a surprise audit. We are going to find that material change in their finances, and then we are going to activate the confession of judgment." I turned back to Sarah. "He wanted to take my daughter's future," I said. "So I just bought his past, his present, and his future." I put on my jacket. "Come on, Sarah. I have a craving for champagne. But I think I will buy a bottle that costs less than my house. I prefer the taste of justice." Sending my daughter back into that house was the hardest thing I have ever done. It felt like placing a lamb back into a cage with wolves, but Jasmine insisted. She said she needed to be the one to finish this. She said she needed to look them in the eye one last time before their world collapsed. Sarah drove her to the gates of the Sterling estate at 5 in the afternoon. I watched the GPS tracker on my monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jasmine was wearing a brooch on her coat that looked like a cheap piece of costume jewelry, but inside it was a high-definition camera and a microphone with a range of 2 miles. We had also sewn a transmitter into the lining of her purse. She was walking in, armed not with guns but with the truth. She walked through the front door and I saw the feed flicker to life on my screen. The foyer was exactly as I remembered it, cold and imposing. Victoria was waiting. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking at Jasmine with a mixture of triumph and disgust. "You decided to come back," Victoria said, her voice tinny through the small microphone. "I assume you have come to your senses." "I am sorry," Jasmine said softly. She played the role perfectly. Her voice was trembling just enough to sound submissive. "I was hormonal. I was scared. I know Blake is just trying to do what is best for the family." Victoria sniffed disdainfully. "Well, at least you admitted it. Go upstairs. Your husband is celebrating. Do not ruin his mood." Jasmine walked up the grand staircase. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I hated them. I hated that they made my strong, independent daughter bow her head. But I knew this performance was necessary. We needed more than just financial leverage. We needed criminal intent. We needed proof that they were not just bad with money, but that they were dangerous. Jasmine entered the master bedroom. Blake was there standing in front of the mirror adjusting his tie. There was an open bottle of champagne on the dresser. He looked at Jasmine in the reflection and grinned. It was a predator's grin. "Look who decided to crawl back," he said, turning around. "I am sorry, Blake," Jasmine repeated, keeping her hand on her purse, angling it so the camera caught his face. "I want to make this work." Blake laughed. He took a swig of champagne straight from the bottle. "You want to make it work?" he mocked. "You do not have a choice, Jasmine. You are my wife. You are property. And guess what? We do not even need your signature anymore." Jasmine froze. "What do you mean?" she asked. Blake picked up a piece of paper from the bed. It was the contract from Phoenix Holdings. He waved it in the air like a flag of victory. "I got the money," he crowed. $10 million, wired into the account an hour ago. We paid off the bank. We are free. And the best part is, I did not need your stupid trust fund to do it." He walked closer to her. The camera shook slightly. I could feel Jasmine's fear through the screen. "Then why am I here?" Jasmine asked. "If you do not need the money, why did you demand I come back?" Blake grabbed her chin. His fingers dug into her skin. "I watched on the monitor, ready to smash the screen. Because you are carrying my heir," he hissed. "And because I want to enjoy watching you learn your place. You thought you could run to your daddy. You thought that old truck driver could save you." He let go of her face and paced around the room, his arrogance filling the space. "Let me tell you something about your father," Blake said. "He is nothing. He is a relic. He thinks he is equal to us because he made a little money moving boxes. But he will never be us. And neither will you. You are just a vessel, Jasmine. Once this baby is born, you are going to sign over custody and you are going to disappear." Jasmine stayed calm. She was brave. Braver than I could have been. "You mean you are going to divorce me?" she asked. "Divorce implies you have rights." Blake laughed. "No, I am going to have you committed. My mother has already spoken to a doctor. Postpartum psychosis is a very serious condition. It would be a tragedy if the mother was too unstable to raise the child. The Sterlings would have to take full custody." I sat back in my chair, stunned. The cruelty was absolute. They were not just planning to take the money, they were planning to steal my grandchild and institutionalize my daughter. Sarah was sitting next to me, typing furiously. "We have it," she whispered. "Conspiracy to commit fraud. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping. We have it all on tape." Blake was still talking drunk on his own power. "And that trust fund," he said, pointing a finger at her. "I will get that too. Once you are declared incompetent, I will be your legal guardian. I will control every penny. I am going to use your mother's money to build a swimming pool." He laughed again. It was a sound that made my skin crawl. "You are evil," Jasmine whispered. "I am a winner," Blake shouted. "There is a difference." He raised his hand as if to strike her. I stood up, knocking my chair over. "Get out of there, Jasmine!" I yelled at the screen, even though she could not hear me. "Run!" But before she could move, the bedroom door opened. Victoria walked in. She was not smiling. She was looking at Jasmine with eyes that were too sharp, too observant. She held a radio frequency detector in her hand, a small black box with a red light that was blinking rapidly. She stopped in the middle of the room. The blinking sped up as she pointed it at Jasmine. "What is that?" Victoria asked, her voice low and dangerous. "What is what?" Blake asked, confused. "Shut up, you idiot!" Victoria snapped. She walked straight up to Jasmine. She did not hesitate. She reached out and ripped the brooch off Jasmine's coat. She threw it on the ground and stomped on it. The video feed cut out, the screen went black. But the audio from the purse was still running. "A camera," Victoria screamed. "You little snake, you are wearing a wire." Jasmine backed away. I heard her shoes scuffling on the floor. "I am leaving," she cried. "Let me go." "Grab her," Blake Victoria commanded. "Do not let her leave this room." I heard a struggle. I heard Jasmine scream my name. I heard the sound of fabric tearing. "Check her purse," Victoria yelled. "No, get off me," Jasmine screamed. There was a loud crash like a lamp falling, then the sound of a zipper being ripped open. "Found it," Blake yelled. "A transmitter. She is broadcasting. Destroy it," Victoria shrieked. There was a loud crunching sound. The audio went dead. Total silence filled my office. I stood there staring at the black screens. The silence was louder than any scream. They had her. They knew she was spying. They knew I was listening. And now they had cut the line. I turned to Sarah. My face was stone. There was no more panic. There was no more planning. There was only the cold, hard reality of war. "Call the police," I said. "Tell them we have evidence of a kidnapping in progress. Tell them to bring the SWAT team." Sarah was already dialing. But I knew the police would take too long. Even with the evidence, Blake and Victoria could talk their way out of it for an hour. They could hide her. They could hurt her. They could stage an accident. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the folder that contained the foreclosure documents for the Phoenix Holdings loan. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, putting her hand over the phone. "I'm going to get my daughter," I said, walking to the door. "You cannot go back there, Quincy," Sarah warned. "You have a restraining order. If you step foot on that property, they will arrest you again, and this time they might shoot you." I stopped at the doorway. I looked back at the black screens. "I own the property, Sarah," I said. "I own the mortgage. I own the debt. Technically, I am the landlord. And I have the right to inspect my investment." I did not wait for her answer. I ran to my truck. The rain had started again, pounding against the pavement. I drove fast, faster than before. I did not care about speed limits. I did not care about red lights. They had made a mistake. They thought cutting the feed would blind me. They thought destroying the camera would save them. But all they had done was remove the last shred of restraint I had left. They had touched my daughter. They had threatened my grandchild. I was not coming as a father anymore. I was coming as a force of nature. I was coming to burn their house down, not with fire, but with the truth I had just recorded. I reached for the glove box. My hand brushed against the cold steel of my 9mm. I hoped I would not need it. But as I saw the lights of the Sterling estate appear on the horizon, I knew that tonight nothing was off the table. Jasmine was in that basement. I knew it. They put her in the dark just like they tried to put me in the dark. But they forgot that darkness is where I learned to fight. I floored the accelerator. The engine roared. "Hold on, baby girl. Daddy is coming." And this time I am not knocking. I sat in my truck at the end of the driveway, but this time I did not ram the gates. I did not need to use my bumper to force entry because I had something far more powerful than a V8 engine. I had the city of Fairfield on my side. I checked my watch. It was exactly 6 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to burn through the mist that clung to the Sterling estate. Beside me on the passenger seat lay my handgun. I looked at it for a long moment. It would have been so easy to pick it up. It would have been so satisfying to storm into that house and exact a biblical kind of justice. But that is what they expected. They expected the angry father. They expected the violent thug. They did not expect a CEO who knew how to weaponize the system against them. I put the gun back in the glove box and locked it. Today, I was not using bullets. I was using bureaucracy. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the convoy arriving. It was a beautiful sight. First came the black sedan of the state district attorney. Behind him was the white van of the city building inspector. Then came the health department vehicle, and finally 2 cruisers from the economic crimes division. I had spent the last hour on the phone with every favor I had ever banked in this town. I had called in debts from councilmen I had supported and commissioners I had helped get elected. I told them there was a structural emergency at the Sterling estate. I told them there was a hoarding of hazardous materials. I told them there was a hostage situation disguised as a domestic dispute. I gave them enough probable cause to warrant a full-scale invasion. The convoy pulled up behind me. I stepped out of my truck. I adjusted my jacket. I was not wearing my work clothes today. I was wearing a suit. The same suit I wore when I sold my company for 9 figures. I walked over to the lead car. Inspector Graves stepped out. He was a stern man with a clipboard and zero sense of humor. He nodded to me. "We have the warrants," Mr. Harper Graves said. "Search and seizure, health and safety inspection, structural integrity assessment. If there is so much as a loose wire in that house, we will find it." "Let us go," I said. We walked up the driveway together, a phalanx of men in suits and uniforms. We walked past the broken gate I had smashed days earlier. It was a symbol of my rage, but this procession was a symbol of my power. We reached the front door. Graves did not knock politely. He pounded on the wood with his fist. "Open up, city inspection. We have a warrant." The door opened after a minute. Victoria stood there. She looked like she had not slept. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing the same clothes as the night before. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. "You!" she hissed. "I told you to stay away. I have a restraining order." I did not speak. I stepped back and let Inspector Graves step forward. He held up a piece of paper stamped with the city seal. "Ma'am, I am Inspector Graves from the Department of Buildings and Safety. We have received credible reports of unpermitted construction, hazardous waste storage, and code violations on this property. We have a warrant to search the premises immediately." Victoria laughed. It was a shrill, nervous sound. "This is ridiculous. That man put you up to this. This is harassment. I am calling the mayor. You can call the president if you like," Graves said, pushing past her. "But we are coming in." He signaled to his team. 12 men poured into the foyer. They spread out like water. They went into the kitchen. They went into the living room. They started checking outlets. They started tapping on walls. It was chaos. Beautiful, organized chaos. "Get out of my house!" Victoria screamed, chasing after them. "You are ruining my floors." I walked into the foyer. I stood in the center of the room, calm and silent. Blake appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked hungover and terrified. "What is going on?" he shouted. "Who are these people?" "They are the consequences of your actions, Blake," I said softly. Officer Martinez from the Economic Crimes Division walked up the stairs. "Mr. Sterling, we also need to see your safe. We have a report of undeclared cash assets that violate federal banking regulations." "That is a lie," Blake stammered, backing away. "Open the safe, sir, or we will drill it open," Martinez said, his hand resting on his belt. While Blake and Victoria were distracted fighting a war on two fronts, I looked at Inspector Graves. I nodded toward the door that led to the basement. I knew the layout of these colonial houses. The basement was always the place where secrets were kept. "Check the foundation." "Graves," I said loud enough for Victoria to hear, "I believe there is a severe structural fault in the basement. It might be dangerous for anyone living down there." Victoria froze. She stopped screaming at the health inspector. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in her eyes. Not the fear of losing money, the fear of being caught. "You cannot go down there," she said, her voice trembling. "The basement is flooded. It is not safe." Graves did not listen. He walked to the basement door. It was locked. He turned to the firefighter who had accompanied the team. "Open it," Graves ordered. The firefighter stepped forward with a crowbar. He jammed it into the frame. Wood splintered. Victoria lunged forward, grabbing Graves's arm. "No, you have no right." "This is private property." Officer Martinez grabbed Victoria and pulled her back. "Ma'am, do not interfere with an official investigation." With a loud crack, the door gave way. A smell drifted up from the darkness below. It was the smell of damp earth and old fear. Graves turned on his flashlight and descended the stairs. I followed him. My heart was pounding in my throat. I was terrified of what I would find, but I forced myself to put one foot in front of the other. The basement was unfinished. It was cold. Water dripped from a pipe in the ceiling, creating a rhythmic tapping sound on the concrete floor. In the corner behind a stack of old boxes there was a mattress, and on that mattress lay my daughter. Jasmine. I breathed. She was curled up in a ball, shivering. Her clothes were torn. Her face was pale in the beam of the flashlight. She looked like a broken doll that had been discarded by a careless child. Graves shined the light on her. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Medic. We need a medic down here." I ran to her. I fell to my knees on the dirty concrete. "Jasmine, honey, it is Dad. I am here." She opened her eyes. They were glassy. She was barely conscious. "Dad," she whispered. "You came back." I promised. I said, tears stinging my eyes. I promised I would always come back. I heard boots thundering down the stairs. The paramedics rushed past me, pushing me aside gently to assess her. "Her pulse is weak," one of them said. "She is dehydrated. Possible concussion. We need to move her now." They lifted her onto a stretcher. I held her hand as they carried her up the stairs. I walked out of that darkness into the light of the foyer. The house was silent now. The inspectors had stopped their work. Everyone was staring at the stretcher. Everyone was staring at the evidence of the Sterling family's cruelty. Victoria stood by the front door. She was pale. She was shaking. She looked at the stretcher and then she looked at me. She tried to muster some of her old arrogance. She tried to find a way to spin this. She fell. She stammered. She fell down the stairs. We put her down there to rest because it is cooler. She asked to go down there. Liar, I said. The paramedics rolled Jasmine out the front door toward the waiting ambulance. I started to follow them, but then I stopped. I turned back to Victoria. I needed to leave her with something. I needed to leave her with a message that would haunt her long after the police cuffs were on her wrists. I walked up to her. I stood so close I could smell the stale champagne on her breath. I leaned in close to her ear so only she could hear me. "You made a mistake, Victoria," I whispered. "You forgot about the contract." "What contract?" She breathed, her eyes darting around. "The loan," I said. "The $10 million you borrowed yesterday from Phoenix Holdings." She blinked, confused. "What does that have to do with this?" I smiled. It was a cold, terrible smile. "I am Phoenix Holdings, Victoria. I own the loan. And you just violated Clause 7. I paused, letting the words sink in. Clause 7 states that the borrower must maintain the value of all collateral. Jasmine is the mother of the heir to the trust fund. That trust fund is the only real asset you have left. By hurting her, you damaged the collateral. You devalued my asset." Victoria gasped. Her knees buckled. She realized in that second that the trap had snapped shut days ago. She realized that I had not just beaten her. I had bought her. I stepped back and looked at her with pure disgust. "I am calling in the loan, Victoria. In full. Today. And since you cannot pay, I am taking the house." I turned my back on her. I walked out the door and into the morning sun. Behind me, I heard the sound of Inspector Graves reading her rights. I heard the sound of Blake sobbing on the stairs, but I did not look back. I climbed into the back of the ambulance and took my daughter's hand. "Drive," I told the medic. "Get us away from this trash." As the ambulance pulled away, I looked at Jasmine's sleeping face. We had won. But the war was not over. Now came the part where I made sure they never hurt anyone ever again. Now came the total demolition. The morning sun did not bring light to my world. It brought a storm of lies that hit harder than any hurricane I had ever weathered on the interstate. I sat in my kitchen, sweeping up the shards of glass from the floor. A brick wrapped in a newspaper had come crashing through my front window at 6:30 in the morning. The note attached to it was simple and crude. It used a racial slur that I had not heard directed at me since the 1960s. It told me to leave town. It told me I was a savage. I did not call the police. I knew who had thrown it. Not the Sterlings themselves. They were too cowardly for that. They had whipped the town into a frenzy and let the mob do their dirty work. I turned on the small television on my counter. The local news station was broadcasting live from the gates of the Sterling estate. The reporter, a young woman with too much makeup and a serious expression, was standing next to Victoria Sterling. Victoria was not wearing her usual designer suits. She was wearing a modest gray sweater. She looked pale. She looked like a victim. She was dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue while the camera zoomed in. "He is a violent man," Victoria sobbed into the microphone. "We tried to help his daughter. Jasmine has been suffering from severe mental health issues. She was self-harming. We put her in a safe room to protect her from herself. And then her father broke in with a team of corrupt city officials. He kidnapped her. He took a sick pregnant woman out of the care of her loving family. We are terrified for her safety. We just want our daughter-in-law back." The reporter turned to the camera. "You heard it here first, folks. A wealthy and respected local family terrorized by a man with a questionable past. Sources tell us Quincy Harper has a history of aggression. We are urging the public to report any sightings of Jasmine Sterling immediately." I turned the TV off. The silence in my kitchen was heavy. My phone had been ringing non-stop for 2 hours. Neighbors I had known for 5 years were blocking my number. The grocery store owner where I bought my coffee every morning had sent me a text message asking me not to come back. In the span of 4 hours, Victoria Sterling had turned the narrative upside down. She had taken the truth and twisted it until it looked like a crime. She had turned the victim into the villain. I looked at the brick on my table. I looked at the glass on the floor. I felt a burning in my chest, but it was not fear. It was the same feeling I had when I was driving a rig through a blizzard on an icy mountain pass. It was the feeling of knowing that one wrong move would send me over the edge. But I also knew that if I kept my hands steady on the wheel, I would make it to the other side. They wanted a reaction. They wanted the angry black man. They wanted me to go on TV and scream. They wanted me to drive back to their house and fight. Because if I fought, I would prove them right. Sarah Jenkins was pacing back and forth in my living room. She was furious. She was a lawyer, but she was also a woman who had seen the bruises on my daughter's body. She was shaking with rage. We have to issue a statement, Quincy Sarah said, her voice sharp. We have the medical report from the ambulance. We have the photos of Jasmine's face. We have the audio recording of Blake admitting he wanted to commit her. We can destroy them in the press. Let me call the network. Let me put the truth out there. I poured myself a cup of coffee. My hand was steady. No, Sarah, I said. She stopped pacing. She looked at me like I was crazy. No, she repeated. Quincy, they are destroying your reputation. They are inciting violence against you. That brick could have hit you. Next time it might be a firebomb. We cannot let them control the narrative. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but it cleared my head. Sit down, Sarah, I said gently. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, her hands clenched into fists. If we release the evidence now, I explained, we start a debate. It becomes, he said, she said. The public will choose sides, and in this town, money chooses the side. Victoria is playing the victim card perfectly. If we attack her now, she will just cry louder. She will say the evidence is faked. She will say the audio is doctored. She will drag this out in the media for weeks. Then what do we do? Sarah asked. Do we just let them lie? I looked out the window at the street. A police car was driving by slowly. They were watching me, waiting for me to slip up. We let them lie, I said. We let them tell the biggest lies they can think of. We let them climb so high up on that pedestal that they think they can touch the sun. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall when I cut the ladder. I turned to Sarah. Silence is a weapon, Sarah. Right now they think they are winning because I am quiet. They think I am hiding. They think I am afraid. That makes them careless. That makes them arrogant. Look at Victoria. She is on TV. She is exposing herself. She is doubling down on the lie that Jasmine was safe in that house. I pulled a folder from my kitchen drawer. It was the loan file for Phoenix Holdings. When we dropped the hammer, I continued. I do not want it to be an argument. I want it to be an execution. A financial execution. I want the truth to hit them at the exact same moment they lose everything. Sarah looked at the folder. She took a deep breath. She understood. She was a strategist too. She realized that I was playing a game that Victoria did not even know existed. You are right, she whispered. Let them talk. Let them dig their own grave. She opened her briefcase and pulled out her laptop. Okay, Quincy, she said. If we are not going to the press, then we need to go to the contract. You said you wanted to call in the debt. I sat down opposite her. I opened the file. I turned to page 20, the acceleration clause. It was a standard paragraph in high-risk lending, but today it was the most beautiful poetry I had ever read. It read simply that if the lender determines that the collateral has been impaired, or if the borrower faces legal action that threatens their ability to repay the full amount of the loan, becomes due immediately. Not next month, not next year, immediately. The police raid this morning is a matter of public record, I said, tapping the paper. The building inspector found code violations. That is a default. The health inspector found hazardous conditions. That is a default. And the fact that they are under investigation for kidnapping, that is a material adverse change. I looked at Sarah. Draft the notice of default. I said, and draft the demand for payment in full. Sarah began typing. The sound of her keys clicking was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a sword being sharpened. How much is the total including the penalty interest? Sarah asked. 10 million principal, I recited from memory. Plus the origination fee, plus the default interest rate of 25%, plus the legal fees for the recovery. Sarah typed for a few more minutes. Then she turned the laptop toward me. It is ready, she said. Total demand is $10,400,000, payable within 24 hours. If they fail to pay, Phoenix Holdings exercises its right to confession of judgment and immediate seizure of assets. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap plastic pen, not a gold one like Blake used, but it worked just fine. I signed my name at the bottom of the order. Quincy Harper, owner of Phoenix Holdings. Send it, I said. Sarah hit enter. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the broken glass on my porch. I looked at the spot where the brick had landed. They have 24 hours, Sarah, I said. Tomorrow morning at this time, Victoria will not be on TV. She will be on the street. And she will not be crying fake tears. She will be crying real ones. I turned off the lights in the kitchen. I was ready to wait in the dark. The time for talking was over. The time for taking was about to begin. The courtroom was cold. It was a deliberate kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel small. I sat next to Sarah at the mahogany table, my hands folded calmly in front of me. On the other side of the aisle sat Blake and Victoria Sterling. They looked perfect. They were dressed in soft colors designed to evoke sympathy. Blake wore a navy suit that made him look young and responsible. Victoria wore a pearl necklace and a conservative dress that screamed grieving grandmother. They held hands. They dabbed at dry eyes. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime for the family court judge. Their lawyer, Mr. Vance, was a man I knew by reputation. He was a shark who charged $1,000 an hour to destroy lives. He stood up and buttoned his jacket, pacing in front of the judge with a practiced gravity. He did not look at me. He did not look at Jasmine, who was sitting beside me, trembling slightly. He looked only at the judge, spinning a web of lies so thick I could almost see it hanging in the air. Your Honor, Mr. Vance began, his voice smooth as oil. This case is a tragedy. We have a young mother, Jasmine Sterling, who has unfortunately inherited a history of mental instability. We have submitted affidavits from 3 different psychiatrists who testify that her behavior poses a direct threat to the unborn child. She is hysterical. She is prone to self-harm. She has been brainwashed by her father, a man with a documented history of violence and aggression. He walked over to the exhibit table and picked up a photo. It was a picture of the broken gate at the Sterling estate. This man drove a truck through a residential gate, Mr. Vance continued. He staged a raid on a private home using corrupt city officials. He kidnapped a woman who was under medical supervision. The Sterling family is terrified. Blake Sterling is a loving husband who only wants to protect his wife and child. We are asking for immediate sole custody to be awarded to the father and for Jasmine to be placed in a mandatory psychiatric hold until she is deemed fit. I listened to every word. I watched the judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson, nodding slowly as she took notes. It was a terrifying sight. The system was designed to believe people like the Sterlings, people who looked right, people who spoke the right language. They were painting my daughter as a monster and me as a thug. Jasmine squeezed my hand under the table. Her palm was sweating. She was terrified that they were winning. She was terrified that they would take her baby before it was even born. But I did not squeeze back. I did not offer comfort because comfort implies fear. I offered strength. I looked at Mr. Vance and I felt a cold amusement. He was a good storyteller. But stories crumble when they hit the hard wall of reality. He finished his opening statement and sat down looking smug. Blake patted him on the back. Victoria allowed herself a small, sad smile directed at the jury box. Sarah stood up. She did not pace. She did not use flowery language. She walked to the podium carrying nothing but a small USB drive. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a razor. Mr. Vance tells a compelling story. But in this courtroom, we deal in facts. And the fact is that the Sterling family did not place Jasmine in a safe room. They placed her in a dungeon. And they did not do it for her health. They did it for money. She handed the drive to the bailiff. We would like to enter into evidence a recording taken 3 days ago inside the master bedroom of the Sterling estate. This recording was made by the plaintiff, Jasmine Sterling, prior to her unlawful imprisonment. Mr. Vance jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. We have not authenticated this source. This is an ambush. Overruled. Judge Patterson said, leaning forward, "Play the tape." The bailiff plugged the drive into the system. The speakers cracked. And then Blake's voice filled the room. It was not the soft, respectful voice he had used earlier. It was the slur of a drunk man high on power. You are just a vessel, Jasmine. Once this baby is born, you are going to sign over custody and you are going to disappear. The courtroom gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. I watched the jury. I saw a young woman in the front row cover her mouth with her hand. I saw an older man frown deeply. Blake froze. His face went pale. He looked at Mr. Vance, but his lawyer was staring at the table, realizing he had walked into a minefield. The recording continued. It was clear. It was undeniable. I am going to have you committed. My mother has already spoken to a doctor. Postpartum psychosis is a very serious condition. It would be a tragedy if the mother was too unstable to raise the child. Then came the sound of Victoria's voice, sharp, cruel. Grab her, Blake. Do not let her leave this room. And finally the sounds of the struggle, the sound of fabric tearing, the sound of my daughter screaming for help, and the chilling command from Victoria to destroy the transmitter. The tape ended. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a truth so ugly that no one knew how to look at it. The image of the loving family had shattered into a million pieces. The masks had fallen off. Everyone in that room could see the Sterlings for what they were, predators. Sarah let the silence hang there for a long moment. She wanted it to soak in. She wanted the judge to feel the weight of it. "Your Honor," Sarah said softly, "that is the sound of a loving husband. That is the sound of a caring grandmother. They were planning to institutionalize a healthy woman to steal a trust fund. They were planning to kidnap a child. This is not a custody battle. This is a crime scene." Judge Patterson slowly took off her glasses. She looked at Blake. Her eyes were hard. She looked at Victoria, who was shrinking in her seat, trying to make herself invisible. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, and her voice was dangerously quiet, "do you have any defense for this?" Vance stood up, but he had nothing. He stammered. He tried to say the tape was doctored. He tried to say it was taken out of context, but he knew it was over. He was fighting a fire with a water pistol. "Sit down, Mr. Vance," Judge Patterson snapped. She turned her gaze to the Sterlings. "In 20 years on the bench, I have never heard anything so vile," she said. "You came into my courtroom and lied. You tried to weaponize the mental health system against a vulnerable woman." She banged her gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Custody is awarded solely to the mother, Jasmine Sterling. The father is denied all visitation rights effective immediately. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Blake and Victoria Sterling. You are to come nowhere near the plaintiff or her child." She was not done. "Bailiff, take Mr. Sterling into custody," she ordered. "Based on this recording, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate investigation into charges of conspiracy to kidnap, assault, and battery." 2 officers moved toward the table. Blake stood up, panicking. "No, you cannot do this," he shouted. "I am Blake Sterling. My mother will fix this. Mom, do something." But Victoria could do nothing. She sat there frozen, staring at the table as her son was handcuffed. She knew that if she spoke, she would be next. She watched as they led him away. He looked at me as he passed. His eyes were wide with fear. I looked back at him and I did not blink. I did not smile. I just watched him disappear through the side door. The judge looked at Victoria. "Mrs. Sterling, do not think you are leaving this unscathed. I am ordering you to surrender your passport immediately. You are a flight risk. You are not to leave the county until this investigation is complete." Victoria stood up shakily. She handed her passport to the bailiff. She looked at me. Her eyes were filled with hate, but beneath the hate was a deep, terrifying realization. She had lost. I stood up and helped Jasmine to her feet. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. She hugged me, burying her face in my chest. "It is over, Dad," she whispered. "We won." I stroked her hair, looking over her shoulder at Victoria, who was standing alone in the empty courtroom, her lawyer packing his briefcase in a hurry to get away from the stench of failure. "No, baby girl," I thought. "We won the battle for your safety. But the war is not over." I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1 in the afternoon. The wire transfer deadline for Phoenix Holdings was in 3 hours. Victoria thought she had just lost her son and her reputation. She did not know that in 3 hours she was going to lose the roof over her head. This was just the beginning. The emotional debt had been paid. Now it was time to collect the financial one. "Let us go home, Jasmine," I said. "I have some paperwork to finish." We walked out of the courtroom, leaving Victoria Sterling standing in the wreckage of her life. She looked small. She looked old. And for the first time in her life, she looked poor. The boardroom of Sterling Construction was located on the 45th floor. It was a glass cage in the sky, designed to intimidate anyone who walked inside. At 2:55 in the afternoon on Friday, the room was filled with 12 men and women who controlled the financial destiny of the company. These were the shareholders, the board members, and the vultures who were waiting for the carcass to rot. At the head of the table stood Blake Sterling. He looked like a man who was trying to hold back the tide with a teaspoon. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of perspiration on his forehead even from the other side of the frosted glass doors where I stood waiting. I adjusted my cufflinks. They were gold, real gold, not the plated nonsense Blake wore. I checked my watch. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, the wire transfer deadline would pass. In 5 minutes, the grace period on the Phoenix Holdings loan would expire. In 5 minutes, I would walk through those doors and turn his life into a cautionary tale. Inside the room, Blake was shouting. I could hear his voice muffled but desperate. He was pointing at a chart on the projector screen. He was telling them that the legal troubles were a misunderstanding. He was telling them that the restraining order was a temporary setback. He was telling them that he had secured new funding. He was lying. And the beautiful thing was that he believed his own lies. He actually believed that borrowing $10 million from a shadow corporation at 25% interest was a victory because it got the bank off his back. He did not understand that he had just traded a leash for a noose. The clock on the wall clicked. 3:00 clock. I looked at Sarah. She nodded. She held the heavy binder of legal documents against her chest like a shield. Behind us stood 4 private security contractors. They were big men, silent men. They were there to ensure the transition of power was orderly. "Open it," I said. Sarah pushed the double doors open. They swung inward with a heavy swoosh of displaced air. The sound in the boardroom died instantly. 12 heads turned. Blake stopped mid-sentence, his hand frozen in the air, pointing at a graph of projected profits that would never exist. He saw me. For a second, he looked confused. He saw Quincy the truck driver. He saw the man he had barred from the building. He saw the father-in-law he had humiliated. His confusion turned to rage. "Security," Blake screamed, his voice cracking. "How did he get in here? Call the police. This man is trespassing." I did not stop walking. I walked straight down the center of the room, my footsteps heavy and rhythmic on the plush carpet. I did not look at the board members. I looked only at him. "Sit down, Blake," I said. My voice was not loud. It was the low rumble of an engine idling before a race. "You do not give orders here," Blake shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "This is a private meeting. You are a criminal. You are going to jail for kidnapping. Get out before I throw you out myself." He looked at the board members, seeking allies. "This is him," Blake said frantically. "This is the lunatic who raided my house. He is dangerous. Someone call 911. I reached the head of the table. I stood next to him. I was 3 inches taller and 40 years wiser. I placed my hands on the leather back of the chairman's chair. His chair. I said, "Sit down," I repeated. Blake laughed. It was a hysterical sound. "Or what? You going to hit me? You going to prove everyone right?" Sarah stepped forward. She placed the binder on the table. It made a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. She opened it to the first page. It was the loan agreement Blake had signed 3 days ago. The signature was highlighted in yellow. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice crisp and professional. "You are currently addressing the chairman of the board and majority shareholder of Phoenix Holdings, your primary creditor." Blake froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the document. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. "Phoenix," he whispered. You are Phoenix." I smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth. "I am the fire and I am the ash, Blake," I said. "And you are just the wood." I turned to the board members. They were staring at me with a mixture of shock and respect. They were business people. They understood money. And they realized in that second that the power in the room had shifted. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing them for the first time, "my name is Quincy Harper. As of 3:00 today, Sterling Construction is in default on a $10 million bridge loan. The terms of that loan included a confession of judgment and an immediate transfer of equity in the event of a default." I pointed to the screen where Blake's profit projections were still glowing. "Those numbers are fiction," I said. "The reality is that this company is bankrupt. The CEO has embezzled funds to maintain his lifestyle. He has leveraged company assets to pay personal debts. And he has committed felonies that have destroyed the company's reputation." "Liar," Blake screamed. He lunged at me. He actually tried to grab my throat. I did not move. I did not have to. One of my security guards stepped forward and caught Blake by the wrist, twisting it behind his back in a fluid motion. Blake yelped in pain and was forced down into the chair he had been standing behind. I leaned in close to him. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see the man he had called a boy. "You called me a truck driver, Blake," I said softly. "You thought that was an insult. But you forgot what truck drivers do. We deliver. And today I am delivering the bill." I picked up the loan document. Clause 14, Section B, I read aloud. In the event of a default, the lender reserves the right to remove existing management effective immediately. I looked at the board. I am exercising that right. As the new owner of the controlling debt, I am removing Blake Sterling as CEO. I am removing Victoria Sterling from the board. And I am seizing all personal assets listed as collateral to satisfy the debt. The board members murmured. One of them, a gray-haired man in a pinstripe suit, raised his hand. "Mr. Harper," he asked, "if you take over, what happens to our shares?" I looked at him. "I am not here to destroy the company," I said. "I am here to clean it. I have a team of auditors coming up in the elevator. We are going to strip this place down to the studs. We are going to find every penny Blake stole, and we are going to rebuild it. But first, we have to take out the trash." I looked back at Blake. He was sobbing now. The fight had gone out of him. He was just a child who had broken a toy he couldn't afford to fix. "You cannot do this," he whimpered. "This is my company. My father built this." "Your father built it," I corrected him. "You broke it. You broke it because you were greedy. You broke it because you were arrogant. You thought you could treat people like dirt because you had a big house and a fancy title." I leaned closer, my face inches from his. "You asked my daughter to sign away her future," I whispered. "You beat her. You locked her in a basement. You thought she was weak. You thought I was weak." I tapped his chest with my finger. "You made one fatal mistake, Blake. You forgot to check who really owned the road you were driving on. You thought you were a king, but you were just a tenant. And your lease is up." I stood up straight. I buttoned my jacket. "Get him out of here," I said to the guards. "No," Blake shouted, struggling as they pulled him up. "You cannot do this. I am the CEO. I am Blake Sterling. You are nobody," I said. "You are a man with no job, no home, no money, and a criminal record. You are exactly what you called me. You are nothing." The guards dragged him toward the door. He kicked and screamed. He looked at the board members, pleading for help, but they looked away. They were already looking at me, waiting for my next command. They knew where the power lay. "Wait!" Blake screamed as they reached the door. "My car. My keys. How will I get home?" I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. "You can walk, Blake," I called out. "It is a nice day. Maybe you can think about your life on the walk. Or maybe you can call your mother. Oh, wait. She is being evicted right now, too." The doors swung shut, cutting off his screams. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It was a high-backed leather chair, the throne of the Sterling Empire. I walked around the table. I ran my hand along the leather. It was smooth, expensive. It was the seat of power that Blake had used to terrorize my family. I sat down. The chair squeaked slightly under my weight. I spun it around slowly, facing the window, facing the city that lay spread out below us. I could see the hospital in the distance where my daughter was safe. I could see the courthouse where justice had been served. And I could see the bank I had bought just to make this moment possible. I spun back to face the board. They were all watching me, waiting. I placed my hands on the armrests. I looked at Sarah. She was smiling, a small, proud smile. "This chair is comfortable," I said, breaking the silence. "The leather is soft. The lumbar support is good." I looked down at the armrest where Blake's sweaty hands had been gripping it minutes ago. I brushed a speck of imaginary dust off the leather. "It is a nice chair," I said, "but it is a little dirty." I looked at the board members. "We are going to need new furniture," I said. "We are going to need new carpets. We are going to need new paint. We are going to scrub the Sterling name off this building. From now on, this is Harper Logistics and Construction." I picked up the gavel that lay on the table. Meeting adjourned. I hit the gavel. The sound was the period at the end of a long, dark sentence. It was over. The Sterlings were gone. And for the first time in a long time, the air in the room felt clean. The sun was beginning to set over the town of Fairfield, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Sterling estate. It was the kind of golden hour that usually signaled the start of evening cocktails and polite conversation on the veranda. But tonight the air did not smell of expensive wine and freshly cut grass. It smelled of exhaust fumes and impending doom. I stood by my truck parked in the exact same spot where I had been arrested just days ago. But this time, I was not in handcuffs. This time, I was the one holding the keys. I watched as 3 police cruisers rolled up the driveway. They moved slowly, almost reluctantly. Leading the convoy was Chief Miller. I could see his face through the windshield. He looked like a man who had swallowed a lemon. He knew what he had to do, and he hated every second of it. He hated that he had to serve an eviction notice to the town's royalty. He hated that he had to take orders from a man he had called a boy in his own station. But he had no choice. The court order Sarah had filed was ironclad. The deed to the house now belonged to Phoenix Holdings, and Phoenix Holdings wanted the premises vacated immediately. Miller stepped out of his car. He adjusted his belt, pulling up his trousers as if trying to summon some authority. He did not look at me. He could not look at me. He walked straight to the front door, his boots heavy on the stone steps. He raised his hand and knocked. It was a hesitant knock, not the thunderous pounding he had used on my door in the past. Victoria answered almost immediately. She must have been watching from the window, waiting for Blake to come home. She was still wearing the same clothes from the morning, but now they looked disheveled. Her hair was coming undone. Her eyes were red. She opened the door wide, expecting salvation. Instead, she found the law. "Chief Miller," she said, her voice cracking with relief. "Thank God you are here. Has Blake been released? Did you arrest that man for harassment?" Miller took off his hat. He held it in his hands, turning the brim nervously. "Mrs. Sterling, I am afraid I have bad news," he said. "I am not here about Blake. I am here to execute a writ of possession." Victoria blinked. She looked at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. "A what?" she asked. "An eviction notice," Miller said, his voice low. "The property has been foreclosed upon by the primary lender. The ownership has been transferred. You have 30 minutes to gather your personal essentials and vacate the premises." Victoria laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "That is impossible. This is my house. My husband built this house. We have lived here for 30 years. You cannot just kick me out." "I am sorry, ma'am," Miller said, stepping forward. "But it is not your house anymore. It belongs to Mr. Quincy Harper, and he has requested immediate possession." Victoria recoiled as if he had slapped her. She looked past him down the driveway to where I was standing. I did not wave. I did not smile. I just stood there, leaning against the hood of my truck, my arms crossed. I was the silent witness to her destruction. "You work for us," she screamed at Miller, pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "We pay your salary. We donate to the police ball every year. You cannot do this to me." "I am doing my job," Mrs. Sterling, Miller said, hardening his tone. "Now please step aside. My deputies need to secure the building." He signaled to his men. 2 officers walked past her into the foyer. Victoria tried to block them. She threw her body in front of the door, spreading her arms wide. "No," she shrieked. "You are not coming in. This is trespassing. Get out! Get out!" It was a pathetic display. A woman who had wielded power like a weapon was now reduced to using her physical body as a shield. But power without money is just noise. The deputies gently but firmly moved her aside. They did not treat her with the reverence she was used to. They treated her like exactly what she was, a squatter. Victoria stumbled back against the hallway table. A vase wobbled and fell, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was sharp and final. She looked at the broken porcelain, and then she looked at Miller. Her resistance began to crumble. The reality of her situation was finally piercing through the armor of her delusion. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered. "Blake is in jail. My accounts are frozen. I have nowhere to go." Miller put his hat back on. "That is not my concern, ma'am," he said. "You have 20 minutes left. I suggest you go upstairs and pack a bag." Victoria turned and ran up the stairs. She was not running with dignity. She was running like a frightened animal. I could hear her sobbing echoing through the open door. It was a sound that filled the empty cavern of the house, a house that was already beginning to feel like a tomb. I walked up the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots. I walked past Miller, who nodded at me stiffly. "Mr. Harper," Miller said, "we are securing the premises." "Thank you, Chief," I said. "Make sure she takes only clothing and toiletries. Everything else, including the furniture, the art, and the jewelry, is now the property of Phoenix Holdings. It is collateral." Miller swallowed hard. "That is harsh, Quincy. She is an old woman. She is a criminal chief," I said coldly. "And she is only reaping what she sowed. Just do your job." I walked to the bottom of the steps. I looked up at the house. It was a beautiful structure. Majestic columns, brick facade, expansive windows. But it was rot on the inside. It had been poisoned by the people who lived there. I watched as the deputies moved through the rooms. I saw lights turning on and off. I saw them checking closets. I saw them doing exactly what they had done to my home only hours before. 10 minutes later, Victoria emerged. She was dragging a single Louis Vuitton suitcase. It bumped loudly on every step. Thud, thud, thud. She was wearing a coat over her shoulders even though it was not cold. She was trying to wrap herself in layers to protect herself from the exposure. She looked small. The grand entrance that had framed her arrogance for so many years now seemed to swallow her whole. She reached the bottom of the steps. She stopped when she saw me. We were standing 3 feet apart. The distance between us was no longer measured in social status or bank accounts. It was measured in morality. And on that scale, she was destitute. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice trembling with hate. "You took everything. My son, my home, my life." I looked at her. I looked at the wrinkles around her eyes. I looked at the fear that was vibrating off her in waves. I waited for the feeling of triumph. I waited for the urge to laugh or to mock her. I waited for the satisfaction of saying, "I told you so." But it did not come. Instead, I felt a deep, weary pity. I felt sad that a human being could be so hollow that without her possessions, she ceased to exist. "I did not take your life, Victoria," I said softly. "I just took your things. If you think those are the same, then you never really had a life to begin with." She stared at me. She wanted to scream. She wanted to scratch my eyes out, but she had no energy left. The fight had been bought and paid for, and she was bankrupt. "My driver is waiting for you at the gate," I said. "He will take you to a motel in town. I have paid for 3 nights. After that, you are on your own." "You are paying for my room?" she asked, incredulous. "Why?" "Because I am not you," I said. She gripped the handle of her suitcase. Her knuckles were white. She looked back at the house one last time. She looked at the windows where she had watched her son grow up. She looked at the garden where she had hosted her parties. She was saying goodbye to her identity. Then she turned and began to walk down the driveway. The sound of the suitcase wheels on the gravel was a lonely, scratching noise. She walked past the police cars. She walked past the broken gate. She walked out of the kingdom she thought she ruled and into the world she had spent a lifetime looking down on. I watched her go until she disappeared around the bend. The sun had fully set now. The house was dark behind me except for the flashlights of the deputies. I turned around and looked at the open door. The entrance was gaping like a mouth. I walked up the steps and stood on the threshold. I did not go in. I did not want to go in. The air inside felt stagnant. Chief Miller walked up to me. "She is gone, Quincy," he said. "The house is yours. Here are the keys." He dropped a heavy ring of keys into my hand. The metal was cold. I looked at them. They were the keys to a mansion worth millions. They were the symbol of my victory, but they felt heavy. They felt like a burden. I closed my hand around them. "Lock it up, Chief," I said, turning away. "You are not moving in?" Miller asked, surprised. "No," I said, walking back to my truck. "I have a home, Chief. It is small and it has a broken window, but it is filled with love. This place is just a pile of bricks." I got into my truck and started the engine. I needed to go to the hospital. I needed to see my daughter. I needed to hold my grandchild's future in my hands. That was the only treasure I cared about. The rest of this, the money, the house, the revenge, it was just dust in the wind. I drove away, leaving the Sterling estate in the darkness where it belonged. The reversal was complete. The queen was in exile and the pawn had taken the castle. But the game was not quite over. There was still one player left on the board, and he was the most dangerous one of all because he had nothing left to lose. Blake was out there somewhere. And a desperate man is a dangerous man. A man stripped of his dignity is the most dangerous animal on earth. Blake Sterling was no longer a CEO. He was no longer a husband. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own ego. For 3 days he had been living in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the sheets are stained and the lights flicker like dying heartbeats. He had no car because I had taken it. He had no credit cards because I had frozen them. All he had was the cash he got from pawning his platinum wedding band at a shop 3 blocks away. That ring was supposed to symbolize eternal love, but in the end, it only bought him 2 things: 6 bottles of cheap vodka and a snub-nosed .38 caliber revolver with the serial numbers filed off. He sat on the edge of the mattress staring at the gun. The metal was cold and heavy in his hand. Outside, the neon sign of the motel buzzed incessantly, a maddening sound that matched the chaos in his mind. He took a swig of the vodka. The liquid burned his throat, but it did not numb the pain. It only fueled the fire. In his twisted reality, he was the victim. He did not see the wife he had beaten or the fraud he had committed. He only saw me. He saw the face of Quincy Harper, the truck driver who had dared to reach up from the gutter and pull him down from his throne. He blamed me for the rain that was falling outside. He blamed me for the stain on the carpet. He blamed me for the silence of his phone. Every failure in his life had suddenly coalesced into one singular target. If I was gone, he reasoned, then the nightmare would end. If I was dead, the Phoenix Holdings contracts would be void. The house would return to him. Jasmine would come back out of fear. It was the logic of a madman, but to Blake it was the only clarity he had left. He finished the bottle and threw it against the wall. It shattered. He stood up, swaying slightly. He tucked the gun into the waistband of his dirty trousers. He put on his coat, which was now wrinkled and smelled of stale alcohol. He walked out into the rain. He did not call a taxi. He began to walk the 5 miles to my house. Each step was a promise of violence. Each step was a beat in the rhythm of his own destruction. I knew he was coming. Call it intuition. Call it the instinct of a man who has spent his life watching for hazards on the road. Or maybe it was just because I knew the nature of men like Blake. They do not accept defeat. They try to burn the board when they lose the game. I was sitting in my living room in my favorite armchair. The house was dark. I had turned off every light hours ago. The only illumination came from the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds, painting stripes of light and shadow across the floor. I was not drinking coffee. I was not reading. I was just sitting there with my hands resting on the arms of the chair waiting. My 9mm was not in the safe. It was sitting on the small side table next to me. A round was chambered. The safety was off. I hoped I would not have to use it. I hoped that seeing me waiting for him would be enough to break his resolve. But hope is a luxury, and I was in the business of logistics. At 2:14 in the morning, I heard the sound. It was the distinct crunch of boots on the broken glass that still littered my porch from the brick incident. He did not knock. He did not try the handle. He went around to the side window, the one near the kitchen. I heard the scratch of metal on glass, then a sharp crack. He had broken the pane. A moment later, I heard the window slide up. He was clumsy. He grunted as he climbed through, dropping onto the kitchen floor with a heavy thud. He breathed loudly, ragged gasps that sounded like a wounded animal. I heard him kicking aside a chair in the dark. He was moving toward the living room. He was coming for me. I did not move. I did not speak. I let him walk into the room. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the faint light from the kitchen. He was soaking wet. Water dripped from his hair and his coat, forming a puddle on my hardwood floor. He held the revolver in his right hand. It was shaking violently. "Blake," I said. My voice was calm, low, and steady. "You are dripping on my floor." He jumped. He spun around wildly, trying to locate the source of the voice in the shadows. He raised the gun, pointing it blindly into the darkness. "Quincy," he screamed. "Where are you? Show yourself, you coward." "I am right here, Blake," I said. "I have been here the whole time." I reached out and clicked on the small table lamp next to me. The light flooded the corner of the room, illuminating me, sitting in the chair and illuminating him, standing in the center of the room, looking like a wreck of a man. His eyes were bloodshot, wild, and unfocused. He looked at me, and for a second he hesitated. He saw that I was not afraid. He saw that I was not cowering. "You ruined me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You took everything. My money, my house, my name. You gave them away." "Blake," I corrected him. "I just picked them up. You gambled your life on greed and you lost. Go home, Blake. Or go to whatever hole you are crawling into tonight. This ends now. It ends when you are dead," he shrieked. He took a step closer. He leveled the gun at my chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. I saw the hammer pull back. "Do not do this, son," I said. My hand hovered inches from my own weapon. "There is no coming back from this. I am not your son," he spat. "I am a Sterling, and you are just dirt." He was crying now. Tears of rage and self-pity mixed with the rain on his face. He wanted to blame the world, but deep down he knew the truth, and that truth was too heavy to bear. He needed to transfer the weight. He needed to destroy the mirror that was showing him his own ugliness. "Say goodbye, Quincy," he whispered. I looked at his eyes. I saw the decision form. I saw the muscle in his forearm tense. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the rain drumming on the roof. I could hear his ragged breathing. I could hear my own heart beating slow and steady. I did not hesitate. I did not flinch. I had given him every chance to walk away. I had given him every opportunity to accept his defeat with dignity, but he had chosen violence. He had chosen the path of the coward. My hand moved. It moved with the speed of a man who had survived decades in a tough world. I grabbed the 9mm. I raised it. Blake screamed a sound of pure primal fury. The silence of the house was shattered. Bang! The sound was deafening in the small room. A flash of light illuminated the terror on his face. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, instantly sharp and acrid. Then there was silence again, a heavy ringing silence that pressed against my ears. I sat there in the chair, smoke curling from the barrel of my gun. I watched as the figure in front of me swayed. The gun fell from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull clatter. It was done. The final contract had been signed, not with ink but with lead. The smoke from my 9mm curled up into the stagnant air of the living room. It smelled of sulfur and finality. Blake was not dead. I am not a murderer. I am a man who knows exactly how much force is required to stop a threat without becoming a monster. I had aimed for his right shoulder, the precise point where the joint meets the collarbone. The bullet had shattered the bone and rendered his gun arm useless. He was lying on my floor, writhing in a pool of his own blood, screaming like a child who had scraped his knee. His revolver lay 3 feet away, useless and forgotten. I did not rush to help him. I did not panic. I placed my weapon on the table and picked up my phone. I dialed 911. My voice was steady as I gave the operator my address. I told them there had been a break-in. I told them I had discharged my weapon in self-defense. I told them to send an ambulance for the intruder. I did not mention his name. To me, he was no longer Blake Sterling. He was just an intruder. When the police arrived, Chief Miller was the first through the door. He saw the broken window. He saw the wet footprints leading from the kitchen. He saw the unlicensed firearm on the floor. And he saw me sitting in my armchair waiting. There were no questions this time. There were no handcuffs. The law is very clear when an armed man breaks into your home in the middle of the night. It is called the Castle Doctrine. I had every right to protect my life. They took Blake out on a stretcher. He was crying, begging them to arrest me, but his words were slurred and incoherent. The paramedics strapped him down, ignoring his rants. As they rolled him past me, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. He had come here to kill me, to silence the source of his shame. Instead, he had only succeeded in adding attempted murder to his growing list of failures. I watched the ambulance lights fade into the distance. Chief Miller stood in my doorway, shifting his weight, uncomfortable. "It looks like a clean shoot, Quincy," he said. "We will have to take your statement down at the station, but I do not foresee any charges." He had a gun. He broke in. "You did what you had to do." I nodded. I did not feel triumph. I felt a heavy exhaustion. I had defended my home, but the war was not over. The shooting was just the violent exclamation point at the end of a long paragraph. Now we had to read the rest of the book. The next morning, the narrative shifted from a local crime story to a federal investigation. When Phoenix Holdings took over Sterling Construction, my team of forensic accountants had started digging. What they found was not just mismanagement. It was a roadmap of felonies that stretched back 10 years. We found shell companies set up in Victoria's name. We found wire transfers that bypassed federal reporting limits. We found evidence that the Sterlings had been laundering money for a shady developer in New Jersey to prop up their failing business. I did not keep this information to myself. I did not use it for blackmail. I put it all in a box, and I handed it to the FBI. 2 days after the shooting, while Blake was recovering in the prison ward of the county hospital, the federal agents arrived. They did not knock politely. They raided the motel where Victoria was staying. They arrested her in her bathrobe, dragging her out of the cheap room while the neighbors watched. The interrogation that followed was a masterclass in cowardice. I was not in the room, but Sarah had contacts in the district attorney's office who gave us the transcript. It was pathetic. When the agents laid out the evidence of money laundering, Victoria did not try to protect her son. She did not play the grieving mother. She turned on him with the ferocity of a trapped rat. It was Blake, she screamed at the agents. He ran the company. I was just a figurehead. I did not know what I was signing. He made me sign those checks. He is the criminal. I am just a confused old woman. She tried to paint herself as a victim of elder abuse, claiming her own son had manipulated her. She offered to testify against him. She offered to give them access to his personal emails. She threw him to the wolves to save her own skin. But the agents were smart. They went to the hospital and played the recording of Victoria's betrayal to Blake. They watched as his face crumbled. They watched as the last shred of loyalty he held for his mother evaporated. She said that Blake whispered, his voice hoarse from the pain medication. She said, "I did it." He laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "I want a deal," he told the agents. "I will give you everything. I have the ledgers. I have the recordings of her planning the laundering scheme. She was the mastermind. She forced me to do it. She said we needed to maintain the family legacy at all costs." And just like that, the Sterling dynasty did not end with a bang, but with a whimpering contest of finger-pointing. They tore each other apart. They traded secrets for leniency. They exposed every dirty trick, every bribe, every lie they had ever told. They thought they were buying their freedom, but all they were doing was digging 2 graves instead of 1. The trial 6 months later was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury did not need convincing. They saw the forensic reports. They heard the recordings. They saw the video of the shooting. There was no charm left to save them. There was no money to buy a defense. I sat in the back row when the verdict was read. Jasmine was not there. She was at home with her newborn son, safe and far away from this toxicity. I was there to bear witness. I needed to see it end. Blake Sterling stood up. His arm was still in a sling. He looked thin. His hair was graying. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a permanent slouch of defeat. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, the judge read, looking over his glasses. "We find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, guilty." Blake closed his eyes. He did not cry. He just slumped forward as if his strings had been cut. The judge turned to Victoria. She was sitting in a wheelchair. She did not need playing the sympathy card until the very last second. On the charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping, the judge continued. "We find the defendant guilty." Victoria let out a wail. It was a theatrical performance, but the audience was tired of the show. No one looked at her with pity. They only looked at her with disgust. The sentencing was swift. Blake Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for 15 years. He would spend the prime of his life in a cage exactly like the one he tried to put my daughter in. Victoria Sterling was sentenced to 12 years. Given her age, it was effectively a life sentence. She would die in prison surrounded by strangers wearing a jumpsuit that cost less than the handkerchiefs she used to carry. As the bailiffs led them away, Blake looked back one last time. He scanned the room until he found me. He looked for anger in my eyes. He looked for gloating, but he found neither. I just looked at him with a blank expression. I was done with him. He was a canceled check. He was a closed file. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. The courtroom emptied out. The reporters rushed to the cameras outside. I walked out the side door into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted of justice. I walked to my truck. I did not look back at the courthouse. I had a stop to make. There was a nursery to finish painting. There was a crib to assemble. There was a life to build. The Sterlings were history. They were a cautionary tale about what happens when you underestimate a man who has spent his life hauling heavy loads. They thought they could crush me. They did not know that I was the road, and they were just bugs on the windshield. I started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was a comforting sound. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. The job was done, and it was done right. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in that federal courtroom. The seasons have turned, and the biting cold of that terrible winter has given way to the gentle warmth of early summer. I drove my truck up the winding driveway of the estate. The wrought iron gates were no longer bent and broken. They had been repaired, but they were standing wide open. I made sure of that. I told Jasmine that this house would never be a fortress again. It would be a home, and a home always has its arms open to family. The house itself looked different. The imposing gray stone that once felt like a prison wall was now softened by climbing ivy and hanging baskets of bright marigolds. The manicured lawn that Victoria Sterling had prized above human life was now scattered with colorful toys. A blue plastic slide sat right in the middle of the grass where the "Do Not Walk" sign used to be. It was messy, it was chaotic, it was beautiful. I parked the truck and walked up the steps. The door was unlocked. Inside, the smell of stale champagne and fear was gone. It had been replaced by the scent of baby powder and baking bread. Jasmine was in the kitchen. She looked like a different woman. The bruises had faded long ago, leaving no mark on her skin. But the real change was in her eyes. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. She moved with the confidence of a woman who owns her space and her life. She was standing at the kitchen island holding a pen over a stack of documents. She looked up when I entered, and her smile lit up the room. "Hey, Dad," she said. "You are just in time. I am about to sign the last one." I walked over and looked at the papers. They were deed transfers and donation forms. Jasmine was not keeping the sterling money. She had taken the entire inheritance that the court had awarded her from the liquidation of Victoria's hidden assets, and she was giving it away. "Are you sure about this, baby girl?" I asked. "That is a lot of money. It could set you up for life. It could buy you anything you want." Jasmine looked down at the paper. She did not hesitate. "I do not want their money, Dad," she said softly. "It feels heavy. It feels dirty. Every dollar of this came from fraud and greed. If I keep it, I am keeping a piece of them with me. I want to build my own life. I want to build it with clean hands, just like you did." She signed her name, Jasmine Harper. She had dropped the sterling name the day the divorce was finalized. With that signature, she donated $3 million to a legal aid fund for victims of domestic abuse. She gave away the fortune that Blake and Victoria had destroyed their lives to protect. She gave it away like it was nothing, because to her it was less than nothing. It was just paper. I put my hand on her shoulder. I was so proud I could hardly speak. She had learned the lesson. She had learned that wealth is not what you have in the bank. Wealth is what you have in your heart. "Come on outside, Dad," she said, putting the pen down. "There is someone who wants to see you." We walked out onto the back terrace. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden light over the garden. We sat down on the teak furniture. It was new furniture. I had burned the old stuff. We watched the wind blow through the trees. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that you have to fight a war to earn. Jasmine poured me a glass of iced tea. She looked at me with a serious expression. "Dad," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," I said. "You spent millions to save me," she said. "You bought the debt, you bought the bank, you paid the lawyers, you probably spent half your retirement savings to burn this family to the ground. Do you ever regret it? Do you ever think about how much money we lost in this fight?" I took a sip of tea. I looked at the horizon. I thought about the days I spent driving a truck across the country, eating cold sandwiches, and sleeping in rest stops to build my company. I thought about the value of $1. I knew exactly what money was worth. "Jasmine," I said, leaning forward, "money is a tool. That is all it is. It is a hammer. You can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use it to break a window. The Sterlings used it to break people. They thought the money made them special. They thought it made them untouchable. They let the money own them." I looked her in the eye. "I worked hard for 40 years, not so I could buy fancy cars or join country clubs. I worked hard so that one day, if a wolf came to my door, I could buy the whole forest and turn the wolves into fur coats." Jasmine smiled a small, knowing smile. "I do not regret a single cent," I continued. "I would have spent every dime I have. I would have sold my truck. I would have sold my house. I would have gone back to driving a forklift, if that is what it took to get you out of that basement." I pointed to the house behind us. "This pile of bricks is not worth your little finger. The Sterlings never understood that. They worshipped the wrong god, and that is why they are in a cell, and we are sitting here drinking tea. Never let money define your worth, Jasmine. Your worth is in your courage. It is in your kindness, and it is in your ability to walk away from a fortune to keep your soul clean." Jasmine reached out and squeezed my hand. "I want to teach him that," she whispered. "I want him to be like you, Dad. Not a tycoon, but a good man." "Speaking of him," I said, looking around. "Where's my partner?" Jasmine laughed. "He is in the playpen. Go say hello, Grandpa." I walked over to the shaded corner of the terrace. There was a large playpen set up on the grass. Inside, lying on a blanket, was a 6-month-old baby boy. His name was Leo. We named him Leo because he was born in the middle of a storm, but he came out roaring. I reached down. Leo looked up at me. He had big brown eyes that looked just like his mother's. He did not know that his father was in prison. He did not know that his grandmother was a criminal. He did not know that he was the heir to a fallen empire. All he knew was that the sun was warm and the grass was green. I picked him up. He was heavy, solid. He smelled of milk and innocence. He reached out with a chubby hand and grabbed my finger. His grip was strong. "Hey there, little man," I whispered. He gurgled and kicked his legs. I held him up so he could see the garden. I held him up so he could see the world. "You are going to be all right," I told him. "You are going to grow up strong. You are going to learn how to fix things, not break them. You are going to learn how to open doors, not lock them." I walked with him down to the edge of the property. I looked at the open gate. "I am not the boss anymore, Leo," I said to the baby. "I am retired. The only job I have now is being your grandpa. And I think it is the best job I ever had." I looked down at his face. He was smiling at me, a pure, unburdened smile. The Sterlings were gone. The anger was gone. The need for revenge had faded into the background. All that was left was this moment, a grandfather holding his grandson in a garden that was finally free of weeds. I sat down on a bench and let Leo fall asleep on my chest. I listened to his steady breathing. It was the best sound in the world. Better than the hum of a diesel engine. Better than the applause of a boardroom. My name is Quincy Harper. I am a truck driver. I am a father. And I am a grandfather. I fought a war to get here. And looking at this little boy sleeping in my arms, I know one thing for sure. It was worth every penny. That is my story. The story of how a closed door cost a family everything and how an open heart saved mine. If you enjoyed this journey, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments below, what is the most important lesson you would teach your grandchild? I will be reading every single one. Until next time, keep your doors open and your family close. The biggest lesson I learned from this journey is that poverty is not about an empty bank account. It is about an empty soul. The Sterlings lived in a palace, but they were the poorest people I ever met because they lacked love and loyalty. True wealth is having the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the world tells you to sit down. It is knowing that dignity cannot be bought, and family is the only investment that never loses its value. We built a life not on gold, but on the solid ground of truth, and that is a foundation that no storm can ever wash away. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and redemption. And tell me in the comments below, what is the one thing in your life that you would never trade for $1 million? I will be reading your answers. Until next time, stay strong and keep your family close.